So let's get started. So this session, as Alex mentioned, is going to be talking about student potential, boosting engagement and impact when you're recruiting student volunteers, and then also talking a little bit around student retainment. So I work at the University of West London. My previous experience has been in heritage. So I worked at galleries, historic houses, theatre. My previous role was at Shakespeare's Globe recruiting volunteers, and they have now moved into the university sector. So it's going to be talking and drawing upon a little bit of that experience. Okay, so to get started, we're going to be discussing what are the needs of student volunteers. And the idea around this kind of presentation is I've been to a lot of presentations in the sector talking about kind of the needs, the barriers, and the support of maybe retired volunteers, which can be the kind of typical demographic for heritage organisations. And I thought there was quite a lot of narrative around that. And I thought actually a lot of that kind of support and a lot of those needs are actually quite similar to student volunteers as well. So hoping to kind of give you a little bit of insight around supporting student volunteers, through the recruitment process and also once they're in your organisation. Okay, so what does the student volunteer look like? So some student volunteers can be balancing lots of different priorities, especially thinking about the cost of living crisis as well. So they're thinking about university, paid work, might also be supporting a family if they're an older volunteer as well, an older student volunteer, and balancing lots of different elements, which can obviously lead to added stress as well. There is also that thing around money as well with cost of living crisis. So lots of different things to think about. But one of the things that might be a little bit different is dealing with kind of confidence and self-esteem. Some student volunteers might be a little bit younger. At the University of West London, we actually have quite a lot of mature students, so that might be a little bit different to some other universities you work with. But thinking about the kind of typical student volunteer, they are a little bit younger, they might lack a little bit of work experience, and it might be a whole new experience for them, which we're going to discuss throughout the presentation. So it's that maybe lack of work experience that leaves them a little bit less confident, and they might need a little bit more support with their self-esteem. There might be cultural differences. So students, in London and kind of the wider areas come from a whole different variety of backgrounds. So there might be a few cultural differences that you might have to explore when they're starting with your organisation. But one of the things that hopefully we are quite used to kind of managing as volunteer managers is that kind of loneliness and wellbeing support. Students do actually, in my experience of working with students, there is a lot of loneliness there. They want to volunteer to kind of meet new people. There might be a need for a little bit of wellbeing support, and they're looking to build those connections, which hopefully is going to be a theme throughout this presentation that we'll explore. But I wanted to just give you a little bit of an overview of the student volunteer and what they look like, which is really going to help inform your practice moving forward. Okay, so we get a lot of these sorts of questions when we're dealing with organisations and charities and the kind of organisations from the non-profit sector is what are students looking for? And of course, one of the big things is work experience skills, okay? And we get a lot of people that sort of say, oh, students might be looking for something more irregular. Are they going to stay long term? There are students who are looking for more flexible roles, which are very desirable to lots of people, considering the landscape of how things are going at the moment and people are getting busier. So they are looking for flexible roles. However, when we're doing one-to-ones with students at the University of West London, they are looking for things that are more once a week, once every 2 weeks. So it doesn't mean that they're not looking for regular volunteering roles. And online volunteering as well is something that they are looking for, and those kind of flexible roles as well. But regular volunteering is still something they're looking for that in-depth experience. But they also, alongside that work experience, they're looking to build connections and meet new people. And they are looking to use volunteering to combat that loneliness. They want to meet people, they want to be in an office environment or an environment with lots of people. And they want to be building those connections, boosting their confidence and their communication skills. And there might be lots of firsts for students as well. Okay, so many students might be completely new to London or completely new to the area where your organisation is. And English might not be their first language. This is something really important to think about with your role descriptions and anything you have in writing and when you're giving any direction, is that there could be language barriers there. And one of the most important things I work with heritage sites and any sort of cultural venues with is that they may not have been to a museum or a heritage site before. And that is really important to think about in terms of your recruitment and your onboarding process. They may not feel that a museum or a heritage site is open to them if they haven't visited one before. We get like, oh, I've never been to anywhere like that before. They might not have any work experience, so this could be their first kind of step into that kind of professional volunteering and work environment. And the barriers, which we've discussed a little bit. So, cost of living crisis, one of the ways to overcome that is, of course, travel expenses. But we understand as time has gone on and lots of things have happened in the recent years, it might mean you might not be able to cover travel expenses. But it is something to explore if possible with your organisation. The interview and application stage, please be very, very clear about the processes. What do they need to do to be involved with you? Think about the language. Could it be that you'll register an interest rather than an application? Could it be an informal chat? So think about the language that you're using. A lot of students, I think, for the heritage sector will be like, do I have enough experience? Do I have to be, a museum professional? Do I have to know about history? Do I have to be an art historian? Do I have to have a particular set of knowledge? Whereas actually, emphasizing the need to learn and be enthusiastic and passionate, but they often will think, I don't have enough experience. And they also might think volunteering might take up too much of their time. So being what we find as well with we put lots and lots of different role descriptions on our online platform, and we find the ones that do best are the ones that clearly say how much time is needed. If it's 4 or 5 hours a week or a little bit longer, be really, really clear about the time expectation. Because as soon as they say volunteering, you might be, oh, I've got no time. Whereas actually, if you're have you got 4 or 5 hours a week? And then they go, oh, actually, I might be able to squeeze that in. So it's all thinking about the language. And also, as well, when saying volunteering once a week, lots of students might find that they might have to step back for a holiday, for example, or if they've got something on that week or a family obligation. So be clear that volunteering is flexible, and if they need to readjust time, then they need to communicate that. We'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. And there is this question of, is the museum a right fit for me? Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit around how you can kind of combat some of those kind of questions. So, do I have enough experience as a student? Is a museum a right space for me? If I haven't been before, I don't know much about museums. So we're going to talk now a little bit more around how you can combat some of those issues in terms of recruitment and in terms of retention once you've got students in your organisation and keeping them long term. So one of the most important things is comprehensive onboarding programmes, providing thorough training for volunteers when they first join so they feel confident and prepared to carry out their duties. One of the big things I think is super important is showing them what they need to do inside the space so they can visualise. One of the things I did at Shakespeare's Globe is buddying them up. They have a big buddy scheme at Shakespeare's Globe where they get paired with a skilled volunteer and they're particularly trained to be a buddy because you want the right person being a buddy and being with the new volunteer. It really helps that new volunteer build connection with your organisation. They've made a friend, they know a familiar face to look for when they then next come, and you build a little bit of a budding relationship. Could be an older volunteer and a younger volunteer. We always found that worked quite well, and you would see them going around the site together. And older volunteers as well have got that little bit more experience. They can direct them. So being clear and direct in your communication as well. Avoid leaving people in new spaces as well when they first start. So when we did the buddy scheme in my previous role, they would meet them at the location and they would stay with them throughout the duration of the shift. With student volunteers, it might take a little bit more time for them to develop, especially if they're new to volunteering and they're new to work experience. However, it will be incredibly rewarding when 6 months down the line, you see them blossom, you see them communicating more and using their initiative more. And it will be a very, very rewarding process. So flexibility, as I mentioned, a lot of the students, when we say, oh, once a week, twice a week, that type of thing, they do see that very, very set in stone. And of course, we do emphasize the need to be reliable, to be punctual. However, we often get a, well, what if I'm away, or what if I have a family obligation? They don't necessarily quite get that you might be able to take a week out if you communicate in a timely and appropriate manner. So explaining that yes, it's once a week, but if anything does happen and you do need to take a step out, then please inform them of the process and how that works. Obviously, we want to make sure that students are reliable and are consistently coming. But if something crops up, there is a process with which they can then talk to the organisation. Or, for example, if new thing happens where they might get a job or family obligations change, they know who to communicate with if their time changes. It's that kind of element of not feeling, roped into something that they feel like they can't get out of because it seems like something's set in stone. So emphasizing flexibility where you can. Obviously, also being like, we expect you to be here once a week. This is what we would like. Okay. So it's looping us on to thinking about those support systems, okay? You might need to do a little bit more regular check-ins with your student volunteers. So how would you do that? In other roles, I've had time to do more formal one-to-ones. I understand that it's not possible for everybody, but you can utilize digital resources to connect. Could it be a phone call? Could it be an email, or even just on the floor when it's their first couple of shifts, just being like, oh, I need to know, I need to just loop round and check in with them and be like, how's everything going? Could also ask a trusted colleague or a trusted volunteer to also check in with them as well, so that they're getting that contact from you. And one of the big things I really want to get through, I think, in terms of this sort of presentation is clearly defining expectations. So we work with a lot of charities around clearly defining roles and responsibilities and expectations to avoid any confusion. So one of the big things I found in working in heritage sites is, you might get a new volunteer, you pop them in a room, but they might not necessarily know what to do in that space. So it's thinking about training them in the space that they're going to be in. How comfortable are they in that space? So what do they need to say to visitors? So in your organisation, how do you expect them to interact with visitors? Are they expected to go up and say hello to every person? If not, what sort of body language are they looking for to initiate a conversation? What are a couple of example questions or opening liners that they can use to initiate conversation with a visitor? What is that expectation in that visitor interaction in that room? So being really, really clear rather than popping them in a room and kind of expecting them to know how to interact. Each organisation is different. There could be cultural differences, a bit of lack of confidence. Or if you're popping them in a room in a museum or heritage site, give them an example of 3 things they can talk about. If they're engaging with visitors about a room or about the museum, what are 3 starting points that they can use? What are 3 objects they can point out in that room? And if they don't know, what do they do if they are unsure? So if a visitor asks them a question, what's the best process and how do they find somebody that can help them? So it's all about not making assumptions that if you put them in a position, they know what they're doing. So it's being really, really clear and quite direct with your communication, and especially around how you expect them to navigate a space and how you expect them to navigate conversations with visitors. Just as an example in a visitor interaction role. And growth opportunities. Now, this one, I often find organisations might feel like they don't have a lot of time to kind of grow individual volunteers, but hopefully there's some really small ways that things can be incorporated. So can they shadow you for a day, for example? Could you pair them with a volunteer for the day that has a specialist knowledge or has had a career in the type of thing that the student is interested in? Something we did at Shakespeare's Globe is we incorporated some of our volunteers into our recruitment process. So they joined in on the interview process alongside paid members of staff, of course, but they were able to shadow that interview process and gave them a little bit of something different to do. Could you organise a Q&A or a coffee with another colleague if they're interested in, marketing, learning teams, events teams, meet and greets with other teams? We find a lot with students that it might not be that their students know exactly what they want to do and they're like, I want to speak to the events team. But meeting and greeting other teams gives them those networking skills, those connection skills, learning how to talk to professionals, and means that the students then invested in your organisation because they're building connections throughout your organisation beyond the immediate volunteering team. Is there opportunity to take on more? It doesn't have to be a whole new role. It could just be supporting a fellow volunteer. If you're a bit low on volunteers, could you ask them to look over two spaces or take on a little bit extra in their day? So it's just thinking of really small ways that can have really big impact on that volunteer, but hopefully doesn't take up a lot of your time. There's also things like project involvement. When I was a volunteer, when I was a lot younger, I got asked to write a blog and I had somebody take a photo of me and it got put on the website. And again, it wasn't a very long blog and it was just talking about volunteering as a young person. And actually, it was so impactful for me because I put it on my CV, I got to ask people quotes, and these are the types of things that students love. And it might just be like a quote on social media. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. One of the big things I found with working with students is they love any sort of like public recognition. So, for example, they're doing volunteering and they're having photos taken of them doing the volunteering. You could do a shout out on social media to say, oh, we've had this lovely new volunteer start, or a new volunteer, a student volunteer has taken on this, has done this, and you take a photo of them in the space. And it's something that they can put on their LinkedIn, on their CV, but it also is so impactful in boosting their confidence skills as well, and really investing them in the organisation by knowing they're doing well. And they absolutely love these types of things. And it's just really small things. You could just do a little thing on Twitter or Instagram. It doesn't have to be a full blog on the website, but those are small ways to really boost that engagement with a student volunteer and showing that they're doing well and that they're invested in your organisation. So a chance to meet people as well. So there's a lot around kind of work experience and students, which is really, really vital. And they are looking for that work experience. But I do often find one of the largest barriers to students volunteering in heritage is not seeing people like themselves, and it's feeling maybe unconfident in the space. However, helping them build connections and having opportunities in your organisation for them to connect is going to really help in terms of their attainment, though they may suffer from loneliness just as much as and maybe working with retired volunteers, but encouraging them to come to social events, introducing them with people. Things I used to do in previous roles was maybe get two new volunteers to start together. Or you could even have them have a buddy at a social event. But one of the things I found really impactful as well is them having a buddy at lunchtime and tea time. Because it's going into a space where there's loads of other volunteers that have been there for a long time and being like, well, where do I sit? Can I use the coffee machine? Where do I put my bag? Where do I sign in? And it's, going into those spaces with lots of other people can be very, very daunting. So if they've got a buddy to come in and be like, this is so and so, this is where you make a cup of tea, this is where you put your bag, and kind of basically just kind of direct them for the whole day and kind of be with them just in case anything crops up. Those are really, really helpful experiences for students. Okay, so really building those opportunities for connection. So I think one of the themes we've tried to kind of look to in this presentation is getting to know your volunteers, understanding volunteers and what their strengths are and what their skills are. Very similar approach that you would take with paid employees. How do you utilise their skills? How can you get students to be more engaged by thinking about what they're interested in, what they'd like to develop, what course are they studying, what might they be interested in? Do they want to take on more? What can they do on top of what they're already doing? So it's really taking an individualized approach, okay? So making sure it's individualized and really thinking about how you can develop that student, but also helping your organization with those skills. Okie dokie. So I've got a couple of case studies from some students that I work with at the University of West London who have gone into some heritage roles. So we have a volunteer here called Suckman. She is doing a digital marketing degree at Boston Manor House, and also a couple of other volunteering roles, but Boston Manor is a heritage site in Brentford, and she's been helping support them with their marketing. This is a couple of photos of her. So she was doing a little bit of volunteering with our team that we'd organised, and then she boosted her confidence, got a little bit like, oh, I want to do a bit more, and started volunteering regularly for Boston Manor House. So she's currently in her second year and she's doing a lot of, digital marketing, social media, website updates, and felt that it's really helped boost her confidence and her social skills and working in a kind of charity sector, giving her that work experience. But she's really talked about the kind of relationship she had with the manager, Anna, there, who was really supportive, understanding, involved her in strategic decisions and discussions so that she could learn more. And that experience has then led her to get a paid role for another kind of heritage project with Brentford Canal Project. So really boosting her confidence and really talking about that relationship she's built with the volunteer manager, that Anna there. A couple more. So Carolina, Shakespeare's Globe, talked. She's doing a fashion degree, so kind of didn't really think much about theatre before. But of course, she gets to see all the amazing costumes. She talked about the warm atmosphere, how she's got to learn more about the Globe and think about kind of hearing stories from visitors, meeting new people. Talked about how flexible the shifts are, and she's having a really great experience there. We've also got Eddie at the Musical Museum. This is in Brentford as well. So he was doing a tech role, and he actually, from this experience, then got his first paid position after he graduated at Sadler's Wells. So he had a little bit of support from us, but had clear guidance and training at the Musical Museum. And that volunteering has gave him unique experiences that he's been able to apply in an interview and an application to then get a paid role. One final one from Boston Manor as well, which I think is the most impactful one. We've had Yash here, who's also doing digital marketing similar to Sukhman. And he's talked about it being a bit challenging, but he had the guidance from Anna, the volunteer manager who I mentioned before, who was friendly, supportive, motivated him, and actually talks about Boston Manor now being his next family. This is a photo of him coming back to the University of West London as a representative of Boston Manor at Volunteer Fair, trying to recruit other volunteers. So an example of that kind of, asking volunteers to do a little bit more and engaging students in kind of extra activities. And he said that volunteering at Boston Manor has helped him to follow his passion and really enjoy life. So you can really see how this experience has been really personally impactful for him. So now, moving forward, thinking about these case studies, we're going to have 4 case studies of our own. We're going to split you into 4 groups in the breakout rooms. So it's going to be an example, I'll talk about it a little bit in the next slide, of a student who's come to do a particular role, but they've got a couple of other skills and maybe some other interests. So discuss how you could develop this student. Think about any development activities you've done in your own organisation, or just think about things you'd like to do. You can also use these case studies to think about wider discussions. So, are there any barriers in your organisations that might hinder your development of volunteers? And what has been your previous experience with any students? So, thinking about particularly that student demographic, how might that development be hindered in your organisation? Have you had any barriers or any positive experiences? So, use the case studies, think about how you might develop the students, but it can delve into some wider discussions. Hopefully, we'll have a little bit of time to feed back at the end. So I'll just go over one of the case studies just so we all understand. So case study 1, Sushant volunteers as a welcome volunteer, but he's also interested in education young people and is currently doing an English course. So we've got case study 2 with Kirat, case study 3 with Anesh, and case study 4 with Tubazor. So we're going to split you into those breakout rooms. What I'm going to do is send a message to each of the breakout rooms detailing the case studies so you can refer back to them. What case study you have depends on the group that you're in. So if you're in group 1, 2, 3, or 4, which should be detailed on your breakout room name, that is the case study that you'll be exploring. But please do use the opportunity to talk about your experiences with some other people on this call. Brilliant. So does anybody want to share any feedback from group 1? There were some very interesting ideas that I would love to sort of share with the group.
Who wants to jump in? I'll jump in and see if anyone else wants to jump in too. We just talked about what support Sushant might need. We made a possible assumption that English wasn't their first language. They might need some consideration with their, helping to support their English skills. They might need a buddy. And we thought as they were interested in education, we would look for the kind of opportunities that maybe they could then move into from their welcome volunteering or do alternately, which might be alongside your education or learning team, perhaps with schools or families or young people. Um, and we also thought about ways we could make him feel or them feel really valued by using the skills they do have. So maybe that could be interpretation with visitors or translation of interpretation materials. So exploring different ways they could get involved. Feel free to jump in anyone for things I've forgotten.
I think we captured everything there. Thanks, Ruth.
Brilliant. Thank you, Group One. So yeah, one of the most kind of important things is thinking about, yeah, maybe some language barriers there. I actually used case studies from 4 students that we actually work with at the University of West London. These are some of our regular volunteers. So and we also discussed a little bit around that kind of terminology as well in Group One. So titles of roles, and sort of sharing some experiences from the University of West London is we get a lot of welcome roles, visitor assistant roles, visitor welcome, that type of thing. Also, Ruth mentioned a bit about object handling. Sometimes you get a little bit with archiving maybe as well. And they're actually really interesting, engaging roles, but we might find that maybe the engagement's a little bit low when we track it on our online system. And we think that sometimes it could be the title of the role because they may not be fully confident with what a visitor assistant is or a visitor experience assistant follow, those types of terminology that actually, if you've not volunteered before, or maybe you've not been to a museum or anything like that before, you might not be fully confident what that means. And actually, when I talk to them and they say, oh, it's really people focused, it's welcoming people to the organisation, saying hello, sharing information, and they're like, yeah, I'd love that. But when I say the title, I can sort of see them being a bit like, oh, I'm not sure. But then when I explain it, they're like, yeah, I love working with people, I'd love to chat more and really boost my communication skills. So it is thinking a little bit around the titles of those roles as well. So we'll just go on to case studies two, sorry, and thank you so much for that little bit of feedback there. So this one, we've got Kira, who's a business student. He's interested in marketing, social media, communications, all those sorts of digital things, but he's currently volunteering as an events assistant. Does anybody in group 2 want to feed anything back if you're comfortable?
I can
I don't mind
start.
to- Oh,
Oh no, go ahead.
I just gonna say I don't mind to share from our group if that's okay, and again just chip in everybody. So we were thinking about maybe having a co-produced meeting. So whoever the events organisation manager person is, to hear from Kira what their ideas are and how they could make content for these events. And then we also discussed the idea of how important it is maybe to give a project that they can do from start to finish so that they can kind of be really well supported through it, but also, I guess, being also really realistic as well. And I think they were some of the points, but if anyone else wants to jump in, that'd be great.
Anything else from group 2?
I think Jess covered pretty much everything. I think we were just focusing on that it has to be working for both the student and the organization. So, like she said, being really realistic, what is possible, but then trying to find projects for the student to evolve in. So we talked, I think it was Jesse was saying they're offering like after having a student in, they might offer things like looking at CVs or anything like that. We offer skills sessions at our organization.
Brilliant.
So
That's really
sometimes you
helpful.
might not have the role available, but you can give extra skill sets.
That's perfect. Yeah. So it might not be that you have paid roles for all the volunteers to apply for, but you are people in the industry that they want to hear from. So you don't, sometimes we get people who might be like, oh, I'm not skilled in CVs and to do a skill session for students, but they want to speak to you, they want to hear from you, and you're in the industry that they would hopefully like to develop in. But it's also about them networking. So if they are able to shadow you or talk to you about a role, or you hold a session where they're able to ask you a couple of questions, it doesn't have to be a whole formal process, but it could just be an opportunity to talk to you and sit down with you and pick your brain. But yeah, of course, about being realistic as well. You want also the experience of the volunteer to work for the organisation as well. And even if you don't have anything for them to do, but you know they're interested in marketing, you could be like, oh, have you got any ideas to send over to us? Just being asked about their ideas is a way of helping them develop as well. So really, really interesting points there. So thank you so much. Okay, so we've got case study 3 now. So this is Anesh. So he is a customer service support volunteer. He's a little bit nervous, but he wants some work experience. He's doing tourism management. So he's really, really interested in visitor attractions. He's really keen to develop, but he's just a little bit shy and is kind of new to the whole experience. Is there anybody in kind of case study 3 who would want to share anything?
I can, if you like. So we felt that because he's quite nervous and he's not had any experience before, that a buddying system would work really well in this case. So we could put him with a more experienced member of the volunteer team, or depending on the attraction that he's engaging with, maybe even a paid member of the staff team. And then we could try and check in with him as much as possible during that first shift to see how it's going. And maybe after the shift, we could check in with the person that they're buddied with to see how he got on, and to see how sort of things developed. We see that he's like keen to develop and grow, so we know that he's really engaged, and we felt from the tourism management course that this probably would be a good role, a good fit for him. And then we could buddy him as long as he felt comfortable, and depending on how that went, maybe he could more take the lead on that role as sort of he developed in the role. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything from group 3.
I think it's important to ask him as well what role would better
Perfect.
suit, because that's boosting their self-esteem and confidence for them to be involved and engaged and to give opportunities as well, and young, fresh, new ideas. I've always loved that. It's the first thing that I do when I work with volunteers.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it gives them experience, for working life in the future where they might be asked to contribute some ideas. So I think that's really vital, is kind of having the opportunity to sit down with them and say, have you witnessed anything that you would like to do? Or getting them even to reflect on their own experience. They might then say, oh, I really like this, but I feel like I'm not so confident. Maybe I need a little bit more training, giving them time to, kind of like you would do with somebody in a paid role, is asking them to reflect on their experience as well and what they think would help them. But yeah, that's some really, really vital points made there. I think having someone to buddy with them, doing regular check-ins, these are just hopefully really kind of low maintenance things for us as staff members, but hopefully would have a really kind of important aspect for that student volunteer as well. And a lot of the students, they are really keen to develop and they are quite passionate, but it might just be that they might be a little bit nervous and they don't know how to move forward. So if you've got the opportunity to sit there and be like, what do you want to do? Then they might be like, oh, well, I didn't know that I was able to do this or to do that. So brilliant. Thank you so much, group 3. So final one, we've got Tubazor is nervous about volunteering in a museum and working with people due to his language and confidence skills, yet he really wants to get experience. So how does anybody from this group, so this is a bit more of an open one, anybody in group 4 have any sort of points they wanted to raise on this? So it could be sort of during the recruitment process, it could be whilst they're currently volunteering. Group 4, please. Anybody?
Hiya. We talked a little bit again around the importance of buddying and how we thought this could really work in the situation, because he's really keen. He's just got some reservations really around language and confidence, but putting him together with somebody who has some of those skills in place, or even thinking, the recruitment phase of like looking to identify people who might be willing to kind of try and pass on those language and confidence skills to people like this could just be really helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ross. And I think one thing to mention also around buddying is the volunteer who's the buddy, the skilled volunteer, it also gives them an extra opportunity to be engaged. And, if you're a kind of returning volunteer, current volunteer, you're super keen to be chatting and impart your knowledge on somebody. And I think one of my experiences in volunteer management, one of the nicest things was seeing people at the Globe, an older volunteer and a younger volunteer, where they're kind of trailing off and they've got this other little young person behind them, trailing behind them. And they're, it was a really nice dynamic of seeing them going round together in a little pair, and being able to kind of work together and seeing, you know, them blossom. So I think it's a really nice experience for kind of both sides as well, to help them develop. And I think it boosts that connection as well. And they make a nice friend as well, so that when they come the next time, they've got a face that they recognise, which I think is really, really impactful for their volunteering experience when they don't necessarily know anybody. So thank you very much, everybody. I think I just wanted to kind of share one thing is when I was planning this presentation, I spoke to a friend who works at the National Trust. I used to also work at the National Trust as well. And she'd just gone to a volunteer fair and she said to me, oh, you know, one of the big things I noticed was that a lot of the students didn't know what the National Trust was. And I said, yeah, I used to get that as well, because I used to go to volunteer fairs and I'd be like, oh, we're from the National Trust, come and volunteer with us. And they'd be a bit like, what is that? I just don't understand. And I would still might explain it to them, and I'd be like, oh, you know, it's a bit like a museum, you know, it was to be set up like a period house, and there'd be loads of really interesting things to look at. And they'd still be a bit like, I still don't understand. If we've never visited somewhere like that, it's quite a hard concept to understand. So what I then did, I got these big perspex boards printed, and I had a picture of what it looked like inside with a volunteer talking to somebody, and they were able to visualize what that volunteering looked like. And it's very difficult for organizations to get photos of volunteers. But it was just a few that I'd taken myself and kind of got the volunteers to pose. But it was really helpful, I think, for students to visualize what that volunteering is and visualize what the space is going to be like. And actually, when they're like, actually, I'm going to be in a beautiful setting, just talking to people. I don't have to be an expert. I'm there to help people. I'm there to engage, and I get to do it in a really nice, beautiful venue that I would have never been to before. So it's just thinking about how you kind of help students visualize themselves in the space. So that's just kind of one thing I wanted to talk about in terms of like volunteering fairs and maybe talking to students that might not be engaged in that heritage or museum aspect. Okay, so just some final thoughts. So if we have volunteers that are more engaged in our organisation and they're building connections, they're having opportunities to development, and it does very much help them have the greatest impact in your organisation, where they feel engaged and they feel a connection. And thinking back to what Yasha said about his experience in Heritage, you know, he feels like that organisation is his second family, and he's been able to blossom in that. And I think that's very, very impactful to see students develop and build that confidence. Okay, so thank you so much to everybody who joined and participated. Heard lots of interesting conversations going on. This is my email as well, if anybody wanted to reach out to kind of discuss anything more or help us, you know, work with you on those volunteering roles and promote them to students, then please do reach out. So thank you so much, everybody, for participating. Alex, I don't know if you have anything else to mention just at the end of the session. I think the Zoom, oh yes, the Zoom link has been shared in the chat, but it is also on the end here so that you can go back to the main session. But thank you so much, everybody. I know it's lots of presentations and things to pick from, but I hope there's some thoughts there for moving forward.
Yeah. Just before we finish, does anyone have any quick questions to ask Connie before we return back to the main room? I think one of the things I'd like to reflect on is that it's really emphasising the fact about the buddying system, because like I think that what I've done with when putting new volunteers into different days is that even if the regular day is going to be a different day, to actually put them in with a buddy at least for the first 2 weeks, and it really does help, you know, to them for them to get established and feel part of the organisation.
Lovely, yeah. So at my old place of work at Shakespeare's Globe, we did the first 3 to 4 shifts, and then they would actually, which was really nice, they would graduate. So they would graduate from the buddy scheme, and they would get a graduation email, and they would sort of say that they'd passed their training. You would talk to them and be like, you can have another buddy shift if you like. In previous roles, I haven't done a buddy scheme, or there was no capacity to. I maybe had a couple of new volunteers start on the same day if it worked. But I think, yeah, having that kind of graduation thing, especially for students, they love that type of thing.
Yeah.
And even it didn't really necessarily mean anything, just they'd pass their training, but they'd be like, I've graduated now. And then their buddy who was with them would be congratulating them. So it was a really nice experience.
I'd like to
Oh, that's
say,
great.
I worked for 10 full-time credits in Wales as Curtains and Partnerships Manager, and I'm really keen to get young people on board because we give time credits as a reward for their volunteering. So
Yes.
they could go to the cinema or swim or, watch a show or something. It's a really good incentive. But
Yeah.
it's for me, it's the capacity building of large numbers and maintaining,
Yeah.
holding the group and keeping track. It's another role in itself, as well as
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes, it is very, very difficult. I think in previous roles.
sorry.
Sorry.
I was saying some people offer different opportunities and give different mixed messages as well. Some, for example, libraries will be keen to accept one or two, whereas some will say, oh, we can't, we haven't the capacity to manage them, and I get quite frustrated about that.
Yes. I think that's a lot of the things for the sector. It is, of course, capacity, but I hope there's a few things in the presentation that will hopefully be for volunteer managers who've got big cohorts and maybe don't have a huge amount of capacity, but just little small things. It doesn't mean you have to overhaul your whole volunteering program.
No.
Hopefully, the idea is that there's just small things you can do on a day-to-day basis that have a lot of impact for an individual, and it doesn't mean that you have to do whole new big processes. Because we haven't got the time for that, unfortunately. But yeah, just small, even like on the day when the new volunteer comes, sometimes we didn't have a formal buddy scheme, but I'd pick somebody nice out on the day and be like, any chance you would just keep an eye on them and stay with them for the day and ask them in advance. And it's not a formal buddy scheme, but it's just making that tiny bit of effort that they've got somebody to go to and you've got a volunteer or a trusted colleague there to help you.